Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of The Off Angle. We are going to be joined today by Moses. A little bit of technical hiccups getting settled, but it looks like we're all good because we've got past the sort of 5-second mark and all that good stuff. But, you know, of course, appreciate you coming on. Very busy time for you in between Pro League games and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, thankful that you're coming on. How is sunny Malta at the minute? How's it treating you?
It's good. It's hot out here, but it's like there's worse place to be stuck to talk about Counter-Strike than Malta. So, yeah, it's not bad. I haven't really gotten out to explore the city yet. We rented a boat. We got a little like sailing yacht on Monday, so we're gonna take that around the island a little bit and then
There you
enjoy
go.
the good weather.
Love that. Love that. I do feel like there's something different about waking up to a bright sunny morning every day. Down in New England, where I live, it's always dreary around this time of year. It starts to get like that.
I
Like,
was gonna say you're starting to get really into the dark times.
yeah. Well, I just woke up this morning, and as I was traipsing through the house, I was like, it's a bit chilly here. Maybe I have to start closing the windows down because we had the luxury of being able to leave them open, but not for much longer. So it's always nice to
Yeah.
hear when people are enjoying the hot weather. There is that seasonal depression thing. It's legit. It's real. It's like
Oh, it
you
hits
don't.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There you go.
there you go.
Yeah.
A little bit of
indeed.
weather for you.
Yeah,
Talking
well-
actual small talk over here.
It's
Script.
usually,
Can you believe
it's
it?
usually the Brits that talk about the weather, but, you know, there we go.
Yeah, and you're sitting over there, and it's always raining anyways, no matter what time of the year it is,
Exactly,
so-
yeah. We broke a few records this summer with how hot it got, so that's kind of cool, but also it's like global warming, so it's not really cool, you know?
Are you planning on hopping into the back of that 14-hour queue to see the Queen?
Probably not. I think that I think that's a bit too
It's a
long
bit
for
much?
me. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm very curious about this because I've seen that line is so insane. Is like,
Yeah.
what would it take for you to stand in line for 14 hours? What would have to
Ooh,
be
that is a
at the
good
end of
question.
that line to make you say, "I'm in for the next 14 hours. I'm just gonna stand here."
Oh man, that is a really good
It's-
question, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some kind of like music legend type deal that,
Okay.
you know, I've not had, that maybe doesn't tour anymore or whatever, you know, something like that. Quite into my music,
Yeah.
so something along those lines.
Okay.
Maybe a Paul Simon. I'm a bit of a fan of Paul Simon. He doesn't tour
Sure.
anymore, you know, so something like that. But yeah, the Queen, not so much for me. I
Not
think
so much.
It's definitely like a weird feeling, and you know, end of
Yeah.
it. She's always been around for my entire life and all this kind of stuff, but. It's like the queue, and then it's traveling down there for me as well, because I'm sort of in the middle of the country. So, yeah, the Queen,
Okay.
not so much.
Queen
Does
doesn't do it for you.
does England have like a what America calls the flyover country, whereas like do you guys have like all of your coastal hubs in like one location or something, and then like everything else is just sort of forgotten by the Londonites, so to speak, or is that a bit different? Because over here, if you were to like say talk about American cities, most people are in like Silicon Valley or they're on the East Coast or whatever, and like everything in the middle, again, flyover
You
country is like the
coastal elites.
pejorative term. So yeah, exactly, coastal elites. So. Is that something that happens in the UK?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. To be fair, I wouldn't say on as big of a scale, because we also have kind of, you know, it's like you get bits of food and all that. But the area that I'm in is like, yeah, there's not too much going on. It's known for sausages and being flat. You know, like there's really not an awful lot.
Okay.
There's like hardly any hills or whatever. A lot of RAF bases, like the Air Force bases, I guess, because it is
Okay.
flat. But yeah, I'd say so. It's like London gets an awful, and there's always kind of like, oh, well, the wages going up across the country, and then also in London, it's going up by a different amount that, you know, is slightly higher. London always has like an extra line when there's a piece of countrywide news. You know what I mean? It's like bills are going up for energy at the moment, and then in London, it's an extra 25-30% compared to everywhere else. So, you know, that kind of thing is pretty commonplace. There's a few other big cities like Manchester is a pretty big one in the north of the country.
All right.
But maybe Birmingham you could throw in there as well. But yeah, London is just, because I think there's a good 5 or 6 million people that are there, whereas the rest of the cities, they're like quite lucky if they hit like 1, you know. So
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. We've covered all the gamut. Do we even need to talk about Counter-Strike? Squid? What do you think?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, so what we wanted to open up with, getting onto the Counter-Strike, I think that's what Prodogo is pushing me towards there. Is this sort of expansion to the ESL Rio tournament. We thought it'd be a nice little spot to start off with, right? Because it's a nice talking point. You can definitely expand it, and whether, you know, maybe we should have more of it, kind of thing. Because obviously, the big thing with the major, when it was announced, you know, it's in Brazil, one of the biggest countries and fan bases of the game, and everyone was like, oh, why have you only, you know, got this sort of medium-sized arena? You should have got one of these football ones. And then a few of the football arenas reached out and all that, and everyone's like, oh, they're going to flip it, they're going to change it. I think, and maybe you'll have a bit more insight on this, to be fair, Moses, but I feel like there's got to be some kind of deposit that you have to put down for these places or whatever, in case the event doesn't do so well, and, you know, the arena's not just wasting their time and energy. But overall, I feel like this expansion of the viewing experience, let's say, because it's not quite, you know, it looked like maybe on that first tweet of the thread that it was like they've picked a new arena, they've got 100k more people coming in. But when you break it down, it's obviously just a few more days, and I think the fan experience as well from goals is really cool. So yeah, what are your feelings on that whole change?
You know, I think it like would have been really cool to see ESL just kind of like go for broke and just like go for like one of those 30,000, 40,000 person footballer. Like if you were ever gonna do it, you'd do it in Brazil. That'd be the place to just kind of swing for the fences. But it's easy to say that as the guy who doesn't have to worry about how much money you spend and how much money is brought in after the fact, you know. And yeah, I think that's the big thing too. Like, I think you're dead on. I don't know, maybe not a deposit, but like some kind of contractual obligation. That I never for a second thought that there was a chance that they actually switched arenas once they kind of announced where it was going to be. But it would have been cool. I mean, I like that they have viewers now for every stage of the major. I think that's something that's been flirted with a bunch over the years. We saw ESL do it at Katowice 2019, I think, when it was a major. With the rotating stage, we had Starladder kind of do it. So we've seen companies like try and kind of build up into this. So I think that's important just to add days for fans, especially in Brazil, where remember on that weekend of the major as well. I think there's also like a Formula One race, and then it's also exams or something like they have a really busy weekend in Brazil when the Counter-Strike major comes. And obviously the Gaules thing is going to be really cool. I'm excited to see how they execute that, because I think one thing that Counter-Strike's always missed as a game and as an esport has been that like influencer and streamer culture and like tie-in. Probably for better, because I mostly hate that culture. But it's like, I mean, there's no doubt that especially in America, that is kind of the culture that drives a lot of the money and drives a lot of the numbers for things. So it'd be cool to be able to get that a little bit more involved. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do with it, and like what they can build off of it for potentially, you know, English language streamers and you know, some of the other big brands that we have in the States as well. So that could be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, it's just been a lot of like, I mean, there's been that intertwining of the South American and North American continents as far as Counter-Strike is concerned, and it's I've noticed that a lot more, even people who don't speak Portuguese are still tuning into Gaules' streams just for the reactions or for the experience of watching him. Like, at least anecdotally, some people who I follow on Twitter or people who I talk to are like, yeah, I was in Gaules' stream and it was crazy. He's popping off. It's like, you don't even understand what they're saying. No, but nope, it's still there though. So yeah, I mean,
that blows my mind. I would never do that. But I mean, yeah, whatever makes people happy.
Yeah. So like that stuff that is a bit obviously is strange to me too. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, clearly he's got some pull. Clearly there's all these Brazilian players and obviously all these Brazilian fans. It does feel a bit past the prime, because now we're not sure if Brazilian CS, as far as like the top echelon of Counter-Strike, is there going to be a match there? Are we still going to see like Fury at the top, or is Imperial going to come back for another miracle run, or are we going to see anything like that? But and those are exciting storylines to get into, but I don't know if you can have too much confidence in the teams themselves. But at the same time, this was supposed to go down in 2020, obviously. And even then, it's like, you know, could have definitely theoretically capitalized on it and struck while the iron was a bit hotter. Maybe 2016, 2017. You were just on for the, of course, the grand final just dropped recently of the time travel land, Moses. So you know all about looking back into the past as that is concerned. great series. If people haven't seen it, they should definitely check it out. I know
Yeah,
Richard always
that's fun to
opens up
record.
the. Yeah. He always opens up the episode with like, "This is a show that everybody says they love, but nobody watches or whatever." But
Yeah,
no,
but
it's
nobody tunes into.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Counter-Strike content's like super difficult. It's super hard to gain any kind of traction, and probably for a variety of reasons. I think you could take it a bunch of different ways, but like that kind of content is the kind of content that I would, I like historical content around sports.
Yeah.
It's what always got me into like basketball and football, was hearing about the teams from the 80s and the 70s and like the old legacy teams. Is kind of like those kind of stories that were told just kind of drew me in. So I'd love to be able to do it for Counter-Strike, but that kind of content just doesn't do well, and because of that, it's a little bit more difficult to pitch those ideas to TOs and to companies that are coming into esports and that want to be involved in the content side of things. So yeah, I wish it would do better, but I mean, it was a fun series, and obviously for diehard Counter-Strike fans, that'll be
Oh
a
yeah,
cool
totally.
trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I feel like
There you
that's a fair point to maybe stick on a little bit in terms of like content on broadcasts and whatnot, right? Because I think a lot of it seems to be the case across most esports. In fairness, obviously, it's like the LEC is maybe the big one that stands out as their content house is, you know, really solid with all these songs and things like that. I don't know whether in the CS community that would be the way to do it, right? But we want to try and hit, at least in terms of the popularity and getting people talking about it at the same sort of level. But it does seem that a lot of the content that's created across all these different titles, and especially in CS, a lot of it tends to be sort of in like a funny angle, right? Like we're doing a bit of a parody or, you know, things that go on the broadcast. And I think that recently we have seen across Pro League and, you know, whatnot, like just a little bit of filler content where it's like a few small interview pieces and, you know, this whole going back, watching your best plays and all that. Maui, I guess, with the food review as of yesterday, we'll see where that kind of goes.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there is a bit of a gap missing for sort of big TO sponsored extracurricular content, you know, that maybe you do have to dig a bit deeper to find it. But a lot of the time it's kind of the community that's creating that sort of stuff, whether it's, you know, the Time Travel LAN or a podcast here, or, you know, you guys starting off, and, you know, it's all a bit weird, I feel, trying to get these TOs involved in something like a big one that I go back and, you know, try and watch and learn from a little bit is like Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football, right, which was one of the big turns back in the day kind of thing. And I feel like we don't have anything quite like that. Flashpoint maybe trying to hit it with the blind spot, but since then we've not quite had that. You know, you don't have to stick around and watch it, but if you're a diehard fan, it's all the same production value, all the same sort of talent that you like, but going a bit further.
I think there's a couple things that get a little bit weird with that one. I think part of it, I mean, probably the biggest issue is, I think, in esports outside of LEC, which is kind of broken through the shell a little bit with the kind of stuff that they do, but still their live broadcast is similar to how they used to do it. Just the extra content is nice, but most TOs, you know, operate under the idea of like, hey, we want to be the Sky Sports, right? We want to be the Sky Sports of Counter-Strike. We want to be the ESPN of Counter-Strike. You know, they're kind of an example of what they use in their head to kind of build how they want the show to look, is what they grew up watching in sports over the past 20, 30 years. So I think in that sense, the kind of creativity of gaming and esports content hasn't really leaked into the live broadcast, because we're kind of just copy and pasting what sports companies have done and just maybe tweaking a few things here and there. I think also, you know, there's so much focus on the live broadcast because, I mean, that is what people want to see is the game of Counter-Strike, but so much of the resources of these TOs go into running the event. So it's also, you know, not just the game itself, but also the infrastructure, having to get everyone here in terms of travel, having to have proper security at these events. So when you get all said and done, they don't really have enough people focusing, you know, that extra content isn't on their radar at the moment. You know, that kind of like side content, things like that is not something, one, that I think there's probably, you know, especially with salespeople, probably an idea, you know, so far that there's not really a great way to monetize it that's going to move the needle at anything significant to warrant the investment. But then also investing in the creative people necessary to actually come up with the good ideas that you could sell on as well. So they're behind, I think, in a couple steps there. Those are battles we've been taking for years, because I think, especially the broadcast talent fall on the other side of that, being like, how are we in this industry of all industries that prioritizes content, and we're missing out on so many opportunities to make that content. So that's a battle we've been taking with pretty much every TO for, I don't know, as long as I could remember in casting. And then I think the other thing too is like we've also pitched at various points, like you said, like an end of the day show, kind of like how Flashpoint had the blind spot, which was super cool. But when you look at like a day of ESL here at Pro League, for instance, 3 best of 3 starting at 12:30, but the desk was live at like noon, and then it goes all the way until like 9, 10, 11 p.m. if the game runs long. All of a sudden you have an entire production staff that's been working close to 12 hours, and you don't want to add another hour onto them for that post day, show, whatever it might be. And I mean, how, you don't always know what time it's going to end. So sometimes it's hard to get viewers to kind of being wanting to tune in if the game goes to triple overtimes and all of a sudden it's starting 2 hours later than it did the previous day. So I think there's a few obstacles there. I think there's ways to get around them, obviously. But I think for the most part, I've kind of gotten to a point where I've taken these battles so many times and I've been exhausted so many times over trying to get some of these things done. It's just like, at this point, we're kind of battling more to have a change in philosophy in the company, and the people that make these decisions is the most important thing. It's not really about the money, not really about the schedule. All that stuff is able to be worked around if you want to, and if you are willing to do it, but you need the people, in position to get to green light these things, to change their philosophy of what's valuable to the show, to the product, to the company. It has to kind of expand into some other things. So once we get there, I think we can start getting a little bit crazier with that kind of stuff.
Well, there's definitely a sense that obviously there's like elephants in every room, so to speak, for pretty much every Counter-Strike event now, especially with regards to ESL and their sort of backroom dealings and stuff that aren't so backroom at the end of the day. But even as setting that aside, it's like you were saying earlier that you've tried to fight this fight so many times. You tried to back down the years. That's obviously the impetus in many ways was for Flashpoint's content arm was that, hey, there's all this stuff that we could have done if we were given the opportunity. So let's get the opportunity now, which I thought was a really cool idea. And certainly while it lasted, it was pretty, I think, promising for the future. So
that would have been a cool timeline to see Flashpoint
Yeah.
actually get to execute on some of the ideas. They had some really cool stuff, and obviously they had a lot of people in position that had that philosophy and had that mindset to it. I know they even had like a writer or two coming in from like WWE to help like make content and help kind of come up with ideas. So it would have been sweet to have like, I mean, obviously a universe where there was no COVID, but it was just a universe in general where Flashpoint had like a year of runway to work with, that they weren't just kind of handicapped right out of the gate, which was unfortunate.
Right, yeah. And it maybe, obviously if the teams were a little bit less risk averse and had fielded rosters that were more competitive or drew more eyeballs, or then maybe that whole ESA tag situation doesn't happen with the FPX signing that goes wrong.
Yeah,
and then
who knows?
Then Katie never films that lovely Twitter video where he's completely shirtless for some reason.
That was great. Good for him.
Listen, he's still making the content, which is what Flashpoint's all about, I guess. So, no, I will say though, you were saying earlier something that caught my ear was that because you've been fighting this battle for so long, now it's like about changing the philosophy and stuff. Instead of trying to like maybe gain ground on individual points, it's like a deeper thing now. I was wondering if that was a significant motivating factor or just one of many things, like eventually all these straws broke the camel's back as far as your decision to depart broadcast work temporarily to go join Team Liquid. Because so this is something that I was talking with Scriv about the other day, is that like I'm curious as to why it happens, and because obviously you're not the only member of talent that's done this. You've got YNK, obviously, who was a part of that, and then he joined FaZe, and then joined SK, MIBR, and then obviously there was Henry G, who went over to the Colossus roster with Cloud9, and now he's back. It's kind of a topical topic just because of that, because he's returned for this event specifically, and it's like interesting to think about how there's members of talent who have sort of flirted at the edges there. They've gone in. They've obviously, I'm not suggesting that they didn't try their hardest, right? But it's more like they've done the job. They've seen how it is. Their big break is really large. Like, it's a big top ask team. It's not like they're
Yeah.
going to be asking to coach like a tier 2 roster and build up their strengths. It's like, no, you're kind of expected to succeed from day one, which is big pressure. And maybe you guys are just used to that from the broadcast, but it's a different kind, I feel like. So you have any thoughts on like sort of what fueled your decision? Was it related to the fact that you weren't able to get much ground in these other talks, or was it just sort of like a confluence of factors, you think?
It's probably closer to the latter, to being a confluence of factors. But I mean, the biggest one by far was just the opportunity to go coach Liquid. I think
Okay,
it was also one of those things of being a former competitive Counter-Strike player and professional player. I think on some level that feeling that you have a little bit left in the tank in terms of the
Sure, yeah.
competitive side of things kind of sticks around long past its expiration date. And so, I mean, I'd always kind of wanted to, I've always like had like a secret desire, maybe not secret, but just a desire to coach a team and see where it could go. And I mean, I would have never left broadcast work if I didn't get an offer like that from Team Liquid. That was just it was one of those things where I knew when I got it and was debating whether I wanted to take it, I think the driving factor was more just like I knew I would, like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I'd hate myself if I looked back and I hadn't actually gone for it. Like no matter what happened, I always would have wondered.
Right,
and I
sure.
didn't want to have that kind of regret over my head. And it was a team as well that I think a lot of the issues were mental and emotional rather than strategic, which I thought, if they came in and they were like, yeah, we want you to come in and like kind of spearhead a complete strategic overhaul, I would have been like, nope, that's not like the job for me. But it was, I thought I could have some kind of an impact on the mentality and emotional state of the team. And yeah, so that was what it was. But there is certainly a level of, I think it goes in like waves, and we've all hit the wall at various points over the
Sure, yeah.
years, which is why we've kind of become, why we always see from the outside like we're such a close knit group of guys that's kind of hard to break into. Is we all hit that wall of just feeling like the progress forward has just stopped and it's just like useless to even try. Whether it's pitching content ideas, whatever it might be, we've all just been in a world where we're just constantly told no, even when we're trying to, like, sometimes feeling like the only one who truly cares about the Counter-Strike product that's being put forward, which isn't the case, but it feels like that at times.
Sure.
So yeah, I think everyone kind of hits that stress point where you just kind of break down a little bit. And when it gets severe enough, you see like the Yankos and myself and Henry like all finding a different way to try something new for different reasons. And you have to remember, we've been doing this for 8 years.
Yeah.
And in those 8 years, we've been in situations where we haven't been getting paid on time, or we haven't had contracts. Sometimes our calendar, our schedule for the next month. Sometimes you don't get picked up to events. Like I've had even this year, I've had points of the year where my schedule wasn't even known until like the week before an event began, where I didn't know if I was going to be working an event. So when you're still battling those same issues over the course of like 8 years, that just seems so small, and you're just like, how is this not solved yet?
Yeah.
I think that's when the stress really fucking escalates. So yeah, we've all hit that wall at some point, and I think everyone kind of stepped aside and tried something different for different reasons. And obviously, all of us have come back to a certain degree as well. I mean, it is an incredible job. It's an amazing job, and we all love it. It's just there's some of those outside factors of working the job itself, just like really just tilt you off the face of the earth.
Yeah, no, I can attest to that a little bit as well, because I feel like this is something that I maybe wanted to talk about, right? The general state, and maybe a bit more specifically with where things are at. Obviously, we've had a lot more kind of money coming in. The merger's going to get a bit more official soon, as far as I'm aware. They've started adding, and a few of the members have got different names and all that sort of stuff that are on Discord and whatnot. So how do you feel about kind of the sort of trickle down effect, right? Because I'd say that I'm in, the mid level, whatever you want to tier it, like tier 2 kind of thing, the odd 1.5 event that comes in, and one of my bigger stresses generally does tend to be like the financial aspect, right? Because it's very competitive, a lot more people getting involved since COVID, and sometimes the rates don't necessarily keep up, or you maybe have to be working everything, or you have to take things for less money than you feel comfortable with, and then you've got all the gymnastics of like, what's the other talent gonna think if they see me, after we've talked, and all that. And I feel that's something that we're maybe missing a little bit, right? Because you talk about contracts and things, it's like not really done at all at my kind of level. And this is what I was saying to Darian yesterday. If I were in sort of conventional sports, as it were, working on the third division of whatever, like maybe a level below college basketball in the UK, we'd probably call it like League One football, but the system's a bit weird. That would be something that it's like, right, I can kind of still be ambitious and still want to move forwards, but I don't have to worry as much about those, outside factors and kind of what am I going to do, and if I turn this work down and all that, it becomes quite difficult. So I don't know if you have any sort of feeling on where that is. Obviously, you've had to do a come up of your own at some point, which is a very different kind of, because I can be thankful that when I get to an event, I've got a hotel to myself and, everything sorted rather than having to sleep in a cupboard or share a bed with someone or whatever, but the sort of the issues are very different now, I think.
Yeah, they are for sure. And I mean, it's a weird place to be. Actually, I think you guys have it probably way harder than we do, in the sense that I know, like, once you get, from all the stories I've heard, and I don't have any firsthand experiences, once you get past like most of like the, I guess we'll just call us like tier one guys, it's like that's like the tier two of the casting scene is where most of like the undercutting and like political maneuvering is actually occurring, which doesn't take place nearly as much as people would like to believe with the top scene as well. So I mean, it seems pretty ruthless down there, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, I think as more of us get older and as more people get older, like, there's only so long that people can maintain these schedules of traveling 200 to 300 days out of the year. It's just not going to work as much. So there's going to be more opportunities that kind of pop up. And it'd be great if I knew a way to reliably kind of have everyone work together to make sure that rates are rising across the board. And um, I don't really know how to do it, to be honest with you. But I think the bigger thing is always having, the guys at the top need to be pushing the envelope to a certain degree. When I came in, it was kind of Anders and Semler in there, pushing the cart forward, making sure rates were on the rise and pushing them as high as they could go. They're the reason that everyone basically these days, as you said, gets their own hotel room when you go to an event. We used to have to share hotel rooms coming in from different parts of the world, everyone on a different jet lag schedule. So I mean, it's just usually, the top dogs, the people in power, need to kind of consistently be pushing for that kind of positive change. And I think I guess it would depend on your perception of what the most important thing is to kind of fix or work on at the moment. But I know, for myself at the top at the moment, the thing that I'm working on right now is, having a long-term multi-year contract and being able to have things in that contract and being able to establish things in that contract that can be worked on in the future. I think what most people forget about esports at the moment, I think the biggest trap I see people fall into in esports is this whole idea of like, man, sports does it this way, or like,
Sure.
they do it this
Yeah.
way in football and this way in basketball. And I'm like, yeah, but like esports is like, Counter-Strike's been around for like 8 years. Football's been around for like 100. Like I don't know what you want. This is like an industry that is really still finding its way. So it's like it's the whole thing of like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Not everything is going to be perfect. You're still going to have to put up with some bullshit, while everyone figures this out, while we figure out how to monetize things and we get more money to make these things better, and we can convince people and get experienced people in the right positions to help make things better. And I think some people get ahead of themselves and want and feel like issues should be solved at the snap of a finger as soon as they're kind of discovered, and it's not always that clean. In fact, it's rarely ever that clean and that snappy. So yeah, there's still long ways to go, and there's still plenty that we can do at the top to push it forward. And I think every one of us on talent kind of, some of us are in agreement and some of us kind of, work for, I know there's some guys who really think that we should be having business class flights, if we're going to be traveling abroad, which is the case in like, 90% of an entertainment industry, if you are, but esports, I think that's just an expense that, no one wants to incur at the moment. I think you have to remember too, there's like this, we always felt this, and we talked about this back in the day. if you remember, I don't know how long you guys were around, but if you were like around for like the Tasteless and Artosis days of StarCraft, where they were
Yep.
just like so integral to getting any viewership
Yeah.
onto a StarCraft event that they could demand pretty much anything they wanted. You know, they were living in Seoul and getting business class flights to events all around the world, which is great. They absolutely should. There's no problem with that. But I think TOs who ran those events were just like, okay, we can never let this happen again. Like we can't ever like be held hostage. So you know, we can't ever have these guys like a pair of commentators like this, or just any element to the broadcast that's so valuable that we have to kind of bend over backwards for them. So I think since then they've been pretty resistant to it, and at times, you know, we felt from or I felt, at least, I won't say it for anyone else, like there has been like some kind of it has been a little contentious at times between casters and the TOs and everything like that. But without any of that, you know, kind of struggle between the two entities, there's never going to be progress. So it's always kind of a good thing. It's just it takes a long time to get these things to change.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point, right? And like you say, not being around for long enough really is and maybe people expect it to move a lot faster or whatever. And there's kind of as well, maybe once you start getting some progress, then you feel like you want more. There's always as well, you do have to see it from a bit of a TO perspective, where there always seems to be something that's not quite right. And, you know, there's one battle that moves into another that moves into another. So, and they have a lot to deal with, you know.
And it's also like fun, you know, some fights it's just hard to find the value in it. Like I know, you know, for me at the moment, it's kind of been a thing where I'm like, I've kind of hit this point in my like line of thinking where I'm like, I don't really want to spend like any kind of, I don't really want to like, I don't want to like have this crazy battle with TOs to try and increase my daily rate by like $50 or something, you know, like that's so pointless to me to like have this energy draining battle just for $50 a day or $100 a day. You know, there are other areas where I think that I could get that way more value out of the, you know, there are other fights that I think would give me more value than the extra, I don't know, $500 per event, you know, whatever it might be. So there's that too, where sometimes you go in, you know, I think there's a lot of focus obviously on the rates and just the pure monetary value that you get. And I think fortunately for us as kind of the top dogs, we've gotten to a point where I just think there's other things other than the money that's valuable. But I don't know, like I don't even know what life is like, you know, kind of at the smaller, not to be a dick about anything, or, you know, but I feel like that guy who like doesn't know like the price of milk. Like I don't even know what like the biggest concern is for, you know, the guys at the lower levels. Like, is it inconsistent work? Is it a low day rate? Is it, you know, I don't even kind of know how that entity works. I just get to hear stories.
Sure. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, I'll tell you one
Yeah,
thing
right.
is that if you remember the Snow Sweet Snow debacle that happened,
Sure.
vaguely you might be familiar with it. The
Yeah, very
idea
vaguely.
was that they were being paid like significantly below minimum wage when all was said and done to represent events that weren't just bargain bin events in terms of the prize pools, and that was like the main
Yeah.
hair splitting thing was like, you know, if this event doesn't have a prize pool, or if this event has like a $5,000 prize pool or whatever, then it makes sense. Like, okay, then, you know, you're saying 12 and a half euros per best of one or whatever is like, maybe that makes more sense. But if you're talking, this is like 100,000, 300,000, $1 million tournament, whatever the case may be, or the circuit overall is like many millions of dollars, then what are you doing? Where's the investment really going here? And that, so I do think that money was fixated on as far as the day rates were concerned. But I also think, from my personal experience, when pitching the idea that content could be built and we could basically be like, we could be casters or we could be analysts on the broadcast desk or whatever, but we could also be content creators. We could also be fulfilling multiple roles to justify a raise in a day rate or something like that. Then that would make a lot more sense as far as like, we're still a symbiotic relationship. It's a push and pull. It's not going to be like, we're not just, you know, rolling the TO over and saying, no, not unless you give us more money. It's like, we want to do more things for you. We want to build our brand. We want to rise up the ranks, so to speak. And, you know, I'm totally out of the game at this point just because I've been too public with my sentiments about like what the companies I would work with or whatever. And that's a whole different story of like basically jumping the gun on being moral or whatever you want to call it. Whereas I totally tanked my own opportunities there. But Scriv is still very much in the game in that respect, so he can talk about things other than this. I just wanted to cut in and say that it definitely feels like we have similar fights in terms of content or trying to do other things where it just gets flat out denied. But we also, I think probably the biggest issue that I was coming up with was that we were expected to deliver more things than we were actually being compensated for, despite the fact that the resources were very much there. So it wasn't like we don't have the money to pay you guys more, or we don't have the opportunity to like build content out for you, or to like, you know, just you can send us the content wholesale and we'll just put it on our broadcast. Like we can do that, but we won't. And that was more of the frustrating issue, is like maybe people didn't feel like it, or maybe the producers or whoever we were talking to weren't being paid enough either as well. Like there's that angle too. Like who knows, but so that's what I can share as far as like my experience.
Yeah, I think you bring up like two good points. Like I know when I first started casting, one of the conversations that we had of like the early talent crew, most of us would get together, and it was very much like at the time. I think the good example was Dota, because like the Dota talent split off into their
Mm-hmm.
two groups. I don't even remember what they're called. It's like Beyond the Summit, who did some CS events, and like another one that created like a different content house. But essentially, the story we were told is that those two kind of splits of the Dota talent were actually driving rates down because they were constantly trying to outbid each other for jobs within the Dota scene. I don't know how true any of this is, so don't stick me to it. But this is just always the philosophy we operate under, whether it's
Okay.
true or not. It was basically like, let's never have like a fraction in the talent team to the degree where we're undercutting each other. Like, you know, we're competitors to a certain extent, but let's also always make sure that we're kind of pulling in the same direction to make sure rates are kind of rising in that sense too. So that was kind of one philosophy we operated under. And then the other one is the same. I mean, it's a very similar issue to what I've gotten to in my career, and a lot of us have gotten to, where, you know, it's really hard to. We've done it for 8 years, but it's really hard in today's age, and I don't know how you do it, especially as an up and coming talent, to just have a career based off casting. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's even possible to just say I am a caster and that's it. Like I don't think it's possible anymore. At least in Counter Strike. Maybe when new games pop up, if you get in early enough and you're one of the first guys to kind of build a name and build a brand and really get in with the community. But I think today you have to be able to provide other value, because if I'm just a caster, you know, the Harrys and the Hugos obviously rose up through COVID. The Scrawnies and Launders obviously rose up through COVID. If I'm only going to be a caster, there's eventually going to be people who come up, and no matter how good and how well liked I am, there's going to be someone who can match that, or who can capture a certain element of the community or certain fraction of the community the way that we did at the start, and can overtake your position. So with those TOs, yeah, it does feel like there has to be some other value, whether they're, you know, for me, it's like a deep relationship that can help kind of build out the broadcast and kind of help with, you know, philosophical and creative ideas around the show. Or if you're going to be like a content creator or a streamer and then do commentary and analysts on the side, you bring some of those viewers, you can build content out to it. But it does feel like you have to have like kind of like a second shtick, so to speak. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
can't just be a commentator.
Yeah, it's all very tough, because I think one of the big things, like irregardless, so it's kind of, you know, where the rates are at, maybe in and of themselves, and if you're getting like every gig, then sure, it would be, you know, good, and you can earn a living off of that. But obviously that's just not the way that it's going to work, especially, again, you know, maybe the competition at the top end, as it were. There's more duos that are serviceable now. It's the same kind of deal within the mid level, right? Because there's so many people who got involved, and it's weird because you have different ilks, different classes, where maybe a Harry and a Hugo come in, and you may have been aware of them before COVID as a duo, but now you've worked more closely and you kind of welcome them in. But people work a lot more separately, I think, as well at this kind of level, where it's like there's guys, because I've been doing it for a while, maybe 4-5 years, I could say, right? And like 3 of those as full time once I finished uni. And there are people, so like I worked a fair bit with Dinko and Hawker when we all started and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those would be people that I'm kind of aware of and that I could talk to at that time. There's a few still around. Yumi's another one, a name that you might know. You know,
Yep.
Jay and Dweg, people like that, where I can maybe go and speak to them. But then there's the sort of new generation, as it were, that's coming up, where the communication between us is a little more difficult, and they don't have the same sort of you know, they're still going through that journey of like, okay, well, maybe I can get more for this. And it's also, it's like it's a much more kind of heavy passion thing, where maybe like yourself, you sort of come up and you're a player first and you're a competitor first, and then you try. I could be wrong on the journey here, but you know what I mean. And then you try your hand at casting, and this is kind of cool. And then you see where it goes. There's no harm, no foul kind of thing. Whereas I think you've got, and I would be one of them, where you've got a lot of 18, 19-year-olds who'll pick it up as a career path. They want to be a commentator. So your whole kind of mentality getting into it and of taking risks and telling people to, get fucked, I'm not doing it for that much, and all this kind of thing is much less, because it's all grounded upon wanting to do this thing and wanting to build up. And if I don't take work, how am I going to get work, and things like that. So the rates argument is one, and there is a little bit of like it depends on what you're doing. There's a bit of a blanket, especially with ESL, do feel I have to be a bit careful or whatever, but there's kind of a blanket rate where, irregardless of what you're doing, whether it's like a concurrent Pro League day or whatever, if you're doing an online broadcast for them, the rate is flat. It doesn't like move up depending on the product, which maybe you feel like it should. But again, in their favor, it's kind of like, take it or leave it, because there's plenty of people lining up around the block that are also serviceable. And for someone like myself, I'm not in like a solid duo. I had one, and then people shuffle around and move out and all
feel
this
you
kind
on
of
that
thing.
brother.
Well, there you go. But yeah, so,
here's the joke is, you might not wait for 14 hours to see the Queen, but there are some casters out there who would wait 14 hours to cast IEM Katowice B and C streams for 100 euros at a best of 3. So that's a bit old. That's an old number, but there you go. That's cover my tracks.
Indeed.
I don't know who it could be, but somebody.
But there's things like that it's difficult. It's scary, right, to sort of turn down the work, especially when. And there are some players in the space that it's like it's a little less scary because they have a good connection with, certain TOs that maybe pay a bit better or are a bit more consistent or whatever, right? Blast would be one that springs to mind, and people like Jackie and Davey, for example, who are maybe just sort of above where that level, you know what I mean? Like in the weird bit in between. But they don't necessarily have to mess around with this kind of, because I guess you've got Davey has his stream angle, and then they sort of get picked up for the better paying work, so you can play around with it a little bit more. And then so there's kind of the communication between all the casters at the level that gets a bit weird, and you try and talk to people, but you're not fully going to convince them. And there's some that I'd say I'm good friends with, and that we can be more candid in conversation, then some that you don't know if you tell them things what they're going to go and do with it, and who they're going to speak to, and you can't.
Welcome to the entertainment industry.
Exactly, right? It's when people try and get this, but once I've met you a few times and maybe we've had a few beers and things like that, and it's like I've got a good read for your character, then I can decide, right, I'll be friends with, or are you just a work colleague that I'm going to keep that same kind of boundary with, right? And then the other thing I'd say that I think is my biggest, like the hardest thing that I find to deal with, is kind of the lack of communication between you and an operator, right? And like, you're not really entitled to anything, but it feels like, especially if it's people that you work with a bit more regularly, when, you'll just kind of, like I had a period during COVID where I worked with like one or two operators who are, running these tier 2 stuff on that CCT circuit, all these different types of companies, a couple of them. I did a lot with them, a few stand-ins here and there when people weren't available, and then that developed into, just being brought in more consistently. I'd say because it was so consistent, some of my like best casting work. And then it's just kind of, I get the odd bit from them now, like a year later, and I don't rightly, is it the rates angle? Am I more expensive than other people? Is it they weren't happy with the work? Is it, and you just don't get that clear line of communication, which makes the job difficult. I don't know what I'm necessarily doing wrong to not get brought in as consistently as, a Jay and Dweg, for example. They work with these operators quite a bit, right? So that's one of the big things for me that I find as a struggle, because I don't like not knowing. I can change aspects of myself.
The uncertainty.
And I can even be like, we just don't need you right now. We're happy. You're not in a solid enough duo or whatever. We want to hire like the same sorts of duos and try and build them up, and we've got more of a vision, and you just don't fit into that. And it's like, okay, I can deal with that. I'm, adult enough to deal with that. I'm just not what they're looking for. But you just don't really get, it's like, sorry, maybe next season. And it's like, that's not it's just not quite what I was
Listen, you're
after,
kind of lucky
you
if
know?
you even get that screen.
Well, yeah, very true. If
They'll
you
just
don't-
leave you on red, like, you know.
yeah, and not respond to emails and things like that. And it's a bit, again, like I say, you're not entitled to anything, and I get it. Like, if you're very busy and if you're in a massive operator as well, like it makes sense. But
well, that's
just-
also another point of the industry too, is like it's about, I mean, one, that kind of stuff of just leaving you on red or lack of communication is someone who's probably, I mean, I'm not going to say like a blanket statement, but a lot of times it's just someone who's probably not necessarily super equipped to do the job, or very little experience if he's not willing to have those kinds of conversations. But also, I mean, to a certain extent, I know a lot of people in these companies are doing the work of like three people. Like
Sure,
most tournament organizers and people working within them are so overworked, it's actually unbelievable. And that's at every level. That's at the top level within companies like ESL and Blast. It's going all the way down to whoever, operator X, that you want to talk about. But you know, I very rarely find someone who's in like an important position that's not working at least like two important roles,
Yep.
just out of necessity, whether it's saving money or just had, you know, at some point someone needed to do it and it just kind of got dropped in their lap and it's never changed. And that's just how it goes. So that's part of the growth that the industry needs to see, is start investing, I think, in the people, instead of just kind of, you know, the grind mindset that is in esports is a very, I don't know, crappy thing. Like I understand it, and I went through the grind of my own and everything like that. And everyone has to do it and deal with it if you want to get noticed and picked up. But at some point, that's got to stop. At some point, you know, you can't have somebody working three different roles to death with no vacation days. So yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's just
There's
all
something
around.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking earlier about how the industry is still very young. You know, CSGO specifically has only been around for like what 10 years, so it's like okay. And then obviously the broadcast around it has been springing up. It was maybe a bit late to the party. Some new arrivals aren't necessarily going to have instantaneous acceptance of everything that's already there. Although, admittedly, we have less and less new arrivals as far as broadcasting goes these days. But you know, the idea of you were talking about people doing multiple jobs. It's like I remember when we were doing some of the stuff that was qualifying into a Blast qualifier, I think, or something like that. It was probably like
Yeah.
tier 2, tier 3 area. And the people who were on there were like had just finished an 8-hour day observing like a PUBG tournament or something, and they had to do 2 CS:GO best of 3s after that. It's like these people must be wrecked. Like those are observing or producing or whatever. It's like no wonder there are issues on all of these broadcasts, and it looks so shoddy at the end of the day because these people aren't being set up for success at all. And that's like before you get to the casters that are
Production
on the
are they're fucking exhausted.
Yeah.
I think everyone in production at these esports events is just so dead by the end of the day. And most of the ones too that like work for some of the bigger companies are like, yep, we just did like a 3-week long Counter-Strike event, and then we got to go off and we're doing like a Fortnite event in this country, and then we're gonna be this here for 2 weeks to do Rocket League, and then it's back to Counter-Strike, and you're just like, holy hell. So yeah, like there's some really brutal grindy stuff going on in esports right now that makes it tough to improve the product. Because I mean, the first thing that happens when you get like tired, you know, and especially on a schedule like that, you know, probably, let's just be real, probably a little bit underpaid also, you have to imagine. So a little underpaid and extremely exhausted, and the first thing that goes out of your mind is any kind of initiative to be creative or help improve the product in any way, and you just kind of become this like mindless drone that is just going from job to job like a little fucking worker bee. And I mean, those are the people who have like the ability and the experience to kind of like create things and make things easier and find a way to streamline a process, but they're just so exhausted that they can't even do that. So yeah, it's part of the whole growth of the industry, I think. And I don't know whether it's a bad thing. Like, I mean, I'm sure those people are still very appreciative for the work that they have and everything, but yeah, we'd like to see those kinds of conditions improve as well as time goes on.
It's a wild ride, I think, as well. You
but
know.
I've had the fortune. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
I've had the fortune of being on the other end of it too, which is why that issue sometimes is so like it's so tough to kind of see. Because I know when we did E-League with TBS and Turner Sports, those people in that studio fucking loved their job. Like, it was the weirdest thing working at esports and showing up every day, camera operators were smiling and telling jokes and high-fiving you in the hallways. Production staff was coming up and like making jokes and memes on the Counter-Strike yesterday. Everyone was jacked up to be there. I have never seen like a corporate culture that was just so energetic and positive. And you realize that to this day, you know, E-League had the best show that we've ever seen in Counter-Strike. And I truly, down to my core, believe that that's part of the reason, is that they had a production staff that was truly interested in the product. They had a production staff that was treated well, that had good rest, that was paid well, that had good working conditions. So nobody was coming into work just like, all right, here we go, another day. Like let's get through it. Just keep your head down. You know, everyone was just pumped to be there, and I've never seen that since in any esports broadcast. Blast comes the closest to it. The Blast production is a good crew who has a good time together, and that's about the closest you can get. But they were just did that catch?
Yeah,
that's good. Good
Nice
cameo.
Good
cameo.
That's Sadicus over there groaning.
Okay,
He's
gotcha.
editing some videos.
There you go.
Love it.
There you go.
But
I was telling Scriv was telling me earlier we might get some cameos if he's in.
Yeah,
the green room,
I
so.
was gonna say, yeah. When you were like, I need to shoot down to the green room, so there you are.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
There he is.
There he is.
lovely stuff.
What's up? Now you should just be. Imagine we just started yelling. It's just, follow me back. Follow me back.
But yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I think that's a fair point though. In all honesty, and maybe that comes down to again, feeling a bit more reward from the work. Maybe that, you know, your ideas and things that you push as a production team or whatever are maybe getting involved a bit more. You know, that's obviously where Blast are at. It's like the one, you know, well, less events basically, right? So they can kind of put a bit more time, effort, and ultimately like money into, you know, making that work. Where, yeah, I think it's like ESL, you run so much, you kind of do have to unfortunately come up with something that works consistently, that you can repeat, and that you can also, they come further down, right? So when you get these challenger events that are, you know, maybe your 1.5 type tier, it's run on a bit of a similar kind of show as, you know, Pro League would be, for example. So it's something that you can, you know, take out and move into a lot of different events. So you kind of have the opposite ends of the spectrum, where it's like, you know, you have quantity, an awful lot, and then you have, maybe you can argue, a bit more quality from Blast. Not to say that, you know, the EPL and the ESL events are like bad and there's just lots of them, but you know what I mean, like that kind of level that Blast try and put in is obviously a bit higher. I wanted to talk about, so we talked about, like, you know, a more general sort of state of casting and things. How do you feel it is at that very top level, right? Maybe not business wise, but just kind of in the sense that, you know, we have you and Sado, Dinko and Hawker are battling a little bit more to get in, and have obviously worked on you know, big event this year. Then you have like Harry and Hugo and Scrawny and Launders, still a few of, you know, Machine and Sponge. You could argue are indeed like a new duo. They'd been around for a while, but at the start of COVID, you know, they weren't really a thing. And then Henry and all this, you know. So it's all, it feels like it's all very open. Henry's back, but is that Machine? We're not quite sure, at least in the public eye, what's going on, and whether he's just having a few issues travel-wise like he has in the past, or what. Is Henry here to stay? You know, there's a lot of these sorts of questions going around, and then, you know, Semler and Anders seem to be a bit more of a back foot. Anders is working a few things here and there, but not quite as, because you'd kind of expect that maybe if you guys wanted to, you two would pair back up again, right? And you know, try and build that back up or whatever, right? So there's a lot of conjecture, I think, in terms of who's doing what, who's casting with who. Are we going to get some returns, you know, and are people sort of soft retiring? Like, what is the deal in your eyes?
No one is really soft retiring. I mean, there's still obviously the questions whether Henry wants to stick around or not. I don't really know where he's at on that one. You know, for me, with Anders, the year's kind of played out the way it's sort of been. Is like I cast kind of Blast with Anders, and ESL's bringing in Sadicus, so I cast CSO with Sado for the most part, who couldn't make Cologne, so Anders kind of hopped in for that one. I think more than anything, it's like, again, it goes back to what I said, where it's, I don't think you can do this job anymore if your only value is just pure commentator. I think you need to be able to bring other value. And I think a lot of people at the top here are trying to find what that value is going to be. I think some people are more interested in kind of fleshing out and building out their own brand in some kind of sense. Um, I know, someone like Sado obviously has interests that are outside of esports that he likes to be involved in as well with his racing and his biking and everything. Um, Someone like myself, and I think Chad kind of falls into this world as well. Yanko probably falls into this world as well, where we want to be more involved with kind of the creative process of the product on a bigger picture. I think for us, when we look at these things, we're just like, um, we'd like to be the kind of Counter-Strike people who get kind of involved and kind of infest every sort of level in terms of like we want to be involved in the sales part of things, we want to be involved in the creative part of things. Like we want to have Counter-Strike people who can pitch these ideas with the same level of passion that we can pitch them, because how this works is usually we pitch an idea or a concept to person X, and person X takes it to person Y within the company, and person Y takes it to person Z within the company. And obviously, as you get further and further along that kind of like corporate chain, the excitement and the intensity and the really like the desire to fight for an idea kind of drifts off. So we want to be involved more in that process so that we can be the ones like ourselves pitching these ideas to the people who have the power to greenlight it. So I think everyone's kind of searching for their place in the industry or what they want to do outside of just casting Counter-Strike at the moment. Um, and trying to use that to kind of secure like a little bit of more like long-term security in terms of the job. That's sort of what it feels like at the top, where I think people are kind of more in the mindset now of being like, you know what, we've done the grind, we've done the crazy travel, we still want to work hard, we still want to bust our ass, but we want to be more efficient about it. We'd rather, I think the general concept is something I've been saying for a few years, and I think some of the other guys have caught on to it, where it's like we're done. We don't want to be mercenaries anymore. We want to like feel like a pride, like the pride of building a product and the pride of improving a product, not just like getting hired and being like, all right, well, show up at this time and cast this game, and then you can fuck off for the night. Like we want to be involved in the other aspects of it too. And I know for me, a lot of that comes into, I want to learn the other parts of the business. Like for me, I'm just sat here and I'm like, I don't know why we can't sign more sponsors to some of the things that we do in Counter-Strike. And I want to know why. Like, what is the metric that, what is causing some of these companies to say, no, we're not interested in this Counter-Strike product as one of, that's probably, I mean, in my mind, it's definitely the best esport. In my mind, it's the number one esport, although probably League of Legends is truly there in terms of the numbers and everything like that. But like, what is it? What is the reason that we can't get more mainstream people into CS? Is it really just violence? Is it really just the gun factor? Is it we're not having enough numbers? Is it that, our product emphasizes the live stream broadcast and some of these companies want to have more personality, or more, some of these companies are looking for more Instagram or more TikTok or more, whatever it might be. I want to learn that so that I can actually help improve. I know like there's I think, I can't speak for any other esport game out there, but I know Counter-Strike is very fortunate because I think we have a really good core of guys who on some level don't really care about anything other than Counter-Strike in esports. Like there's a lot of us who, we don't necessarily care about the industry, esports industry as a whole. We obviously do, but our focus is on CS. Our drive is to make Counter-Strike the best that it can be, because we've been involved in Counter-Strike for 20 some years now. And I think that's kind of where everyone feels to be at the moment, is kind of finding what else we're doing other than casting, so that we can focus on some other things too. If that makes sense. That was long-winded, but we got there in the end.
We got there. Yeah, no, something that you said there that got to me was when you said that like the vibe of like, oh, just cast this game and then fuck off, you're done. It was like exactly the vibe that I had when I had aspirations more to be like, I mean, you could say similar to your comment earlier about how like the flame of competition or whatever never maybe expires, even though maybe it should. It's like always lingers. In theory, it would be awesome to cast again, but like my idea is basically it would be. There you go. It would be great if we could cast like, all the time or whatever, but I would really like to be part of the broadcast, just like what you were saying. And the vibe that I got at tier 2 is basically the same vibe you were just talking about there. And when I heard from many other casters that it was like, yeah, we are just kind of people who are put on the broadcast. It feels like sometimes we're not really integrated in all these ways that we want. I was like, oh man, like I was actually hoping that we would get to that point. Like I was hoping that would be part of the come up of like, if you do ascend to tier 1, yeah, sure, be a part of the broadcast, be like a bigger part there. And instead of being like, oh, it's just like is it really just like a more golden shackles or whatever, golden handcuffs situation?
I think it kind of comes into the part where you want to start seeing like more creativity in some of these products, because the nice thing is we have gotten a few more elements sold on some of these products, but especially the analyst desk is, I mean, golden shackles is a great way to put it, because the desk starts having more and more elements that are sold, but because of that, it's so structured and it's very much like, this is what you say, this is what graphic is going to be up, this is how you announce it, this is what you call it. And you've lost that ability to have like the not all the time, but you have lost like a lot of time to where you can just kind of go off on your own and do something crazy and do something random and have a little bit of fun with it. You've lost that ability to smash a baguette on the table. You've lost that ability to rip open a t-shirt at the desk. You've kind of lost those moments that you can create. And I think those are the moments that kind of endeared us as talent to the Counter-Strike audience at the start of things. And I think those are the moments that were some of the really exciting moments in the past that we were able to kind of bring to help emphasize and really highlight the Counter-Strike that was being played. And I think a lot of us want to find a middle ground. Like, we know those elements are super important to the TO, and we know those elements are super important that we can continue making these broadcasts and doing our job, but we want to find some kind of a middle ground where we get some of that freedom back into the show and some of that spontaneity back into the show, because the gaming industry and esports industry is so, these days, it's so personality driven, and it's I think viewers know very much and are very intelligent about when they're being sold to. And I think if we can find ways to have like much smoother and much cleaner integration of our partners into the shows, and we're just not there. Like, it's not really a concept quite yet, but I don't know.
Still growing,
when we look at the broadcast, I think we see missed opportunities everywhere. When we're probably some of the most critical people when it comes to the broadcast, because we're just like, God, it would be so much cooler if we did it this way, or like, why aren't we doing this, or why aren't we adding this into it? And I think sometimes we lose sight of how good of a show we and companies like ESL and Blast actually put on, because we see the mistakes, we see the missed opportunities, and that's what we're focused on more than anything, is how do we improve this? So you're kind of always looking for something that wasn't done super well, and you do sort of focus on the negative a little bit too much, and we've fallen into that trap a number of times.
So
yeah, that's a big deal.
I was just kind of thinking though, because you mentioned like the tier 2 Pronogo, just to get a bit more on that, right? Like I definitely say that the main issue like the tier 2 of casting or whatever is that it just kind of falls on deaf ears. It's not maybe that necessarily, it sounds like what you're saying, there's more obstacles and there's more you have to, because it's such a big product, and it feels like at my kind of level we should be experimenting a little bit more. And every now and then, like I work on ECL, right, which is like the whole feeder league eventually into conference and then pro league and all that, and sometimes we get things that are kind of given to us. It's like, oh, we've got this piece of content, and it's like a plays of the month or whatever, that kind of thing. Something very simple and whatever, but it does, bring the broadcast up a little bit, and we love that shoulder content. And then this season, shout out Jackson, who does a lot of work with us. He kind of threw the idea in the ring of like having sort of webcams on constantly for like the cats, so maybe we have a bit more of a laid back kind of vibe and things like that. But sometimes I feel like, so that's something, because obviously that's an ESL product, they are a little more proactive, but it's also like, it would be nice, I guess, for us in a group, the regular people that get hired for it, to be maybe consulted, or to, do you guys have any idea? Let's have a brainstorm hour or whatever, come in with some ideas and we can all sort of whiteboard it type vibe in a call or whatever. There are definitely some operators where it's like, and it's even like, some of us have been around long enough and longer than these guys who are coming into tier 2, where I could say, like, I know what you're trying to do here. I've seen it done before in a better way. Try and add this or change this, or or whatever. And it just kind of doesn't really get picked up on like at all. So I think that the energy is maybe a bit different, where you not necessarily ignored, but yeah, it's on kind of deaf ears, and they're just not really looking to do that. Whereas it sounds like maybe in your guys' situation, it's a bit more logistical. You know what I mean? Like there's corporate, there's business, there's does it make any money? Does it, you know? So I guess it is kind of a little bit annoying in different ways, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's like correct characterization, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is like the hardest thing to get around sometimes is like, is this worth, it's like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is this going to move the needle in any meaningful way? Is probably the biggest obstacle. Like, yeah, this would be a cool idea and everyone can agree this is a cool idea, but why are we going through all this work if it's not going to make any significant improvement? Like, how much is it actually going to change things? So and especially when it comes to a project that's going to require money, like that's the next hard one too. Is there going to be some kind of return on the extra money that we're now injecting into this portion of the show? So yeah, I think there's a million places where some of these ideas get stopped and obstacles pop up as well. I think that's one of the fun things too, is it would be cool to have some of the lower divisions or some kind of product be like, even if you could just publicly declare it, like, this is going to be the experimental product. We're going to try some crazy shit, this year on ECO. We're going to try and change the broadcast a little bit. We're going to try and change some elements. We're going to try some new things. Not all of it's going to land, but let's see what happens. And then maybe you find it like a gem in there for some reason. But I think that overall, that kind of that risk taking and that creativity is tough when you have a larger corporate environment. Like I mean, it's hard too, because once you bring partners into it, it's not just like kind of ESL saying like, we can no longer just get away and do whatever we want now. Like, oh, I don't know who's like the main sponsor is on ECL, but I don't even know if there is one. But if you take like the main broadcast as well, now you're also representing, like US Air Force. Now you're also representing, whoever it might be, Coinbase. And do they want their product to be involved in something that might look like hell? Do they want their name involved in something that might not land quite as much? I've seen some of the contracts or some of the pitch deals to get to bring in partners as well, and just like the complexity of like of what these companies are being provided is like insane as well. Like there's also factors of like, okay, this logo needs to be shown for X amount of minutes across a day. This logo needs to take over the entire background this many times throughout the day. And all of a sudden, if you're if you're changing things around, these deals have already been signed, and it's like, okay, well, now that if we don't have this giant green screen, like, where are we going to put these elements that are contractually required for us to like pop them up? So, I mean, there's a million obstacles that just pop up out of nowhere that most of the time when I pitch ideas and I make like progress, I get past like the first two levels essentially, and I'm on like the third level, and it like legal comes in, and you're like, boom, and that's like, fuck, I didn't think about that.
A hard reset.
Yeah, you're like, all right, back to the beginning.
Yeah, it's just like any roguelike, basically. It's a Hades vibes. No, I'll say one of the things that really sticks out to me for this is like, if you're going to pitch the idea of like an experimental league, first of all, the idea as a member of talent or former member of talent is like, does it matter that I'm here, or does it matter that somebody is here? And I want it to matter that I'm here specifically. Like, I want to be a part of the reason why this product is memorable or entertaining or quality or whatever. I don't want it to just be like, we needed somebody to sit in this spot and be put here on the screen and then make the talking noises while the game is going on. Like, no, I want to be like more involved in that. And so that's where it's like, that's where my push would come in. But then you also have the idea of like, if you're going to do an experiment, do it at these leagues that I don't even know what the viewership is, but when I was doing it, it was like 2K, 3K max on like a big game. And it was, I mean, I think they're still handing it out to like, not whoever, but like, if you have if you fill out an application, you stream it on your own stream. Like, a lot of that stuff has to be, I guess, compartmentalized and modular enough that it can just be slotted into anybody's OBS. So I can see why they would be a little bit concerned about that. But for the official ESL broadcasts, like the ones that are going on the ESL TV streams or whatever, you would think that they would do a little bit more like that, or they would have a little bit more of a show, because as far as like what you're going to get out of a more cookie cutter broadcast, the bettors are going to watch anyway. It doesn't really matter what they would just sit on HLTV if it suited them. The people who are maybe just looking for Counter-Strike to watch at a given time because it's what they like to do. Richard Lewis is famous for saying that he'll watch any level of CS. He doesn't care. He just likes to watch the game. Like, there's people out there that are like that. They're going to watch pretty much no matter what, as long as it's not terrible. Like, as long as
Richard Lewis
listenable.
Runs an entire tournament of bots.
Yeah.
That is mind blowing to me.
Yeah. He loves CS, dude.
That shit is messed up.
Yeah. I can't. I don't know.
He asked me to come on that show once in a while, and I'm like, no, Richard, I can't watch bots for 3 hours. I can't do it.
Dude, the bots have Astralis players' names on them, and Gambit won the second major.
It was
yeah.
Funny.
So,
but no, I guess the thing there is definitely like you talk about personality, I feel like a lot of people are just kind of going to tune in, and Richard and Thorin's kind of the classic where they built up a lot of that
cachet
personality,
right?
and then kind of like a following, because what you get. There's fun personality. There's like someone like Captain Flowers, who I don't think he's working on it, but he was like an LCS play-by-play commentator, very stereotypically American kind of personality.
Loved it,
and all
great.
that kind of stuff. Great energy, but it's very like there's a type, isn't there? So, and I feel like Richard and Thorin have definitely tapped into the visceral, like British humor and that kind of thing, but also like you're getting in there for some honesty and for some real kind of takes, no holds barred type thing. So
well, it's fun. You can always you can tell usually with most talent like what kind of an environment that they like their career has kind of grown up in, because obviously Richard and Duncan come from like the early days of esports where you could be a little bit more brash. The line of what was acceptable was way different, and especially at the early days of CSGO broadcasts, those guys were in the era as we all were, but those guys really kind of were some of the first ones in it, where as members of the desk, you would have to fill for like 2 hours, like just some random issue would pop up and you'd have to fill. And everyone's kind of gone through that. But then, I mean, if you kind of even fast forward it a little bit, like part of the rise during COVID of Harry and Hugo, if you listen to their style, like they're just fun to listen to. And you can kind of tell that they had that rise during the online era of Counter-Strike, where since the Counter-Strike wasn't as great and the stakes weren't as high, and there weren't as many arenas to raise the intensity, it was really kind of personality and humor and that kind of energy that kind of drove the show. And it's pretty telling that probably coming out of, they were probably the pairing and the duo that had the biggest rise through COVID, because that is their bread and butter, is just funny energy and sanity and craziness. And they do it very well. And you can kind of see that in the way they cast even today outside of COVID as well. So same with Scrawny and Launders, have like a very unique style to them that I think is probably vastly different from anything that's come before. And they too have a little bit of like humor and craziness to them, a little bit more buckled down, a little bit different, but it's got its own unique feel to it. So it's just kind of, you can just kind of see in some members of talent like what kind of an environment. And for us at the old guard, I think transitioning as casters back to online during COVID was like fucking torture. Because we grew up where in an era where every event was a LAN event, every event was in a stadium, every event was in front of a crowd. So we got a little bit more polished and buttoned up, and we got a little bit our casting kind of leans towards like storylines and raising the stakes and raising the intensity and the hype, and not as much in like the silly and basic just wild fun that some of the other guys have. So when we went back to online casting, it was very tough to kind of transition between those styles. So I don't know, casting's an interesting art form, and I think we've just got some cool people involved in it. But you can always tell like kind of where people came from, where their style or where their career really cemented itself.
I think we just need Beyond the Summit style broadcasts for ECL. What do you think, Scriv? Do you think we could all just gather around and I know it would require people to be in the same room, I guess, but just come on, just have this.
It can't go full Summit. It can't go full Summit. Summit events, I'll tell you,
they look like a lot of fun. We
did some stupid shit at Summit events. We got away with some stupid shit at Summit events. So you can't really go full Summit, but certainly like drawing it in that direction, finding some kind of comfortable ground between the two of them. And I know we talked about, me, Chad, and Yanko have talked about that in our podcast as well. And it's a conversation we've had with a few people, but it feels like it'd be the perfect event for it. And it feels like, that those Summit events were so loved by the community. It feels so like it's something that's really, really missing from the Counter-Strike circuit right now, is an event like that, or with that kind of a vibe to it. So, I think we have to find some way to incorporate that. I think, this is kind of the problem at the moment at Counter-Strike Esports, is, in my mind, without an event like Summit, is everything is like so buttoned up and like so serious, and like everything is like intensity. Everything is like a world championship, and that's cool. But we also have to remember that at the heart of like esports is gaming and is video games. And at the heart of that is just hanging out and having fun with a buddy, and hanging out and having fun with friends. And it's a bit more personable. And I think Counter-Strike has kind of lost that. And I think it's really important and really valuable that we get it back in some way. And I don't know what it would be. I don't know if it's a new product. I don't know if it is kind of changing the style of Pro League, but we need something. Someone somewhere needs to create an event like that. And at the moment, there's no space for Summit to come back into the calendar in any meaningful way. There's no space for a new TO to come into it. And we need to find some way to get that charm of a Summit event back.
Yeah, I mean, Fragadelphia was in the news for all the wrong reasons, but that's a perfect opportunity for there to be this sort of experimentation where it is a little bit lower level in terms of the competition. Like an academy team from Europe almost won it, obviously. But if you think about like, the vibe that you could get from something like that, where it is supposed to be this sort of pop-up LAN where you just come in and Beers Adelphia was like a tag that people kept using and stuff. It's like, yeah, let's just drink and have some fun. It's like that's the perfect spot for that too, where I guess there is no corporate overlord from ESL or whatever that's sort of trying to make sure that the shots are called and that the sponsors are showed exactly and all that stuff. Like maybe that's the spot where we can get it, but unfortunately not in the news for that.
I was at one of the early Fragadelphias, and that was kind of like the vibe. Not on the broadcast so much, although back then, like I don't think he had like really any way to like make a truly creative vibe for a broadcast. But I mean, the event does just feel like a reunion of like the of NA Counter-Strike people. Like everyone kind of goes there. Anyone who's anyone like kind of like shows up and says hi and is like, hey man, I haven't seen you in like 4 months. What's going on? All the players get back together, the teams, and that could be a really cool thing. Fragadelphia is kind of an interesting tournament organizer. I've wanted to reach out to them for a while, actually. But they're just as one of the few TOs that actually operate events in NA. They're just it's kind of an interesting spot. And I don't think like a lot of people realize they've got like a full blown fucking Counter-Strike circuit around the States.
Yeah,
they do like 5 or 6 events like around the country throughout the year. Like Philly, I think they do one in Chicago. I think they did one out west. They did one in Texas. Like they've got plenty of stuff going on that just doesn't get a whole lot of attention, which is a shame.
Building it up. Growth, like you were saying earlier, right? It's all coming together. So yeah, I think it'll be good. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We have Epic Lad in the UK. It's a similar sort of vibe. It's funny in the UK. There's two. There's like Insomnia as well, which maybe like in Source was a bit more legit. I think is like a bigger tournament in the circuit. To be fair, but yeah, they're very different energy. Where it's like Insomnia is very corporate, and it's like an expo as well. So they've got different games going on, and they've got it's not just specifically a Counter-Strike tournament.
It's probably closer to like a DreamHack Open. Like
sure, yeah, definitely, yeah. But Epic Land's always kind of the one that I think people are, a bit more hearty with and a bit more kind of friendly and all that sort of stuff. Like, well, not friendly, but you know what I mean? That sort of reunion type deal. So where they're coming back together and stuff like that. But I think it's a fair point because I mean, I like one of the first events that I watched was like the Take TV in 2015 Acer Predator Masters. I think it's the one where like Richard had all the drama with yeah. But I mean, there was that as like the aftermath, right? But while watching the event as like someone who hadn't really, I think it was like just before Cologne that year or something, but it was definitely like one of the first events that I watched, right? Having gotten into the game and then, League of Legends was my first game that I watched and played and all that. But CS was definitely the one that, fell in love with a little bit more.
Stole your heart.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I remember watching that and they're kind of drinking, they're laid back and a lot of stories and it was all very funny. And yeah, I think that we are missing that a little. And some of the Summit content was brilliant. Like, to this day, that Steel, bit with Timmy and all that is just incredible. It's just so good. And, because it's like we have something, we know that it's a bit of a dark period for the game or whatever, what happened to that team, but we have to be able to go back and laugh at stuff like that, And I think that maybe that type of energy is missing from certain events. Maybe it is, you get an online kind of deal, because I mean you got to remember as well, like the Face It stuff in the early ECS seasons when they were doing their online group stages. That was a very, very laid back kind of thing, and they'd have a different rotation of a guest every week. Maybe they lacked having more personalities on the broadcast or whatever, but again, the idea was definitely kind of there. So I think, a roll back to that, whether it is like, more online stuff that people work on. I feel like that would be the place to do it. Like I mentioned a bit earlier, I think it's possibly what they're trying to lean towards with ECL. Like if you have the webcams on all the time, it definitely feels more like a stream then. And maybe when it comes to like playoff time, you take that away and it's a bit more serious. Or because we run, especially on EU, there's an A stream and a B stream. Maybe you have A stream as the big matchup of the day, and then the B stream is, you know, chilling and having a bit of fun or whatever, because the game might be much more one-sided or whatever. But yeah, that kind of experimentation angle needs to be found again for sure.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of ways to do it. It's just like I said at the beginning, it takes a change in philosophy, and without that change in philosophy behind the show, like you're not gonna get new ideas kind of filtering in if it stays the same way. So, I think we're on a good path. I think we've had some conversations that have been promising this year, but I mean I think I've said that every year since I started casting. So we'll see what comes of it eventually. But yeah, you know. This all sounds like doom and gloom. Counter-Strike's in an amazing place. There's just again, like we always notice the missed opportunities and the room for improvement more than anything.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely in terms of the game as well, like itself, like esports is always on the up, but if you can see that trajectory of the game also following it and, you know, just continuing to grow, I feel like that is a bit of a sigh of relief for some of us, because I think, you know, there's been games in the past, there's maybe games around now as well, like, you know, PUBG could be an example, whatever, where it's like they're still pumping money, still having the esports, but eventually the ground's going to fall out from underneath it when, you know, the game just doesn't bring the numbers or whatever, and the TO or even the game developer themselves are like, right, well, this is kind of, I think Gears of War is a game recently, actually, that was all like developer supported, and it just doesn't have the player base anymore. So they're just not. It's just esports is just gone. You know, there might be a few like little local things or a few online tournaments that the community gets together, but you know, it's we have to be thankful in that sense that we're not necessarily going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's like the real luxury is like there's very few games out there, especially a game like Counter-Strike that's been around for 23 years basically at this point. And
that's older than some of the talent. Can you believe that?
Yeah, it's older than some of the players.
There you go. A lot of them.
Yeah. Well.
So yeah, I mean, it's cool being able to have that kind of longevity to it, and I mean, it's important as well because if you're truly ever going to build up an esport to the level of the sports that we have now, it has to have that staying power, and also like the other kind of unspoken issue with growing this is, you know, you can do all you want. You can pump as much money and make the product, but like the biggest thing that is going to, I think, increase the viewership and increase like, you know, loyalty and retention to a particular esport is going to be, you know, what about the Counter-Strike people who've been watching for the past, you know, 10 years of Counter-Strike esports that are now like, you know, 30 years old, about to have kids. And those kids are going to be raised in a house that's watching Counter-Strike esports, you know, you want that kind of like that's how it's always been in the States, at least, is, you know, you get involved with your dad's team, and I'm sure with football as well, your favorite football club and whatever it might be. Like we need that too, that next generation of Counter-Strike fans that's going to come up watching the game and rooting for a team or a player throughout their childhood. Just kind of still just building viewership over the years. So again, it's a long-term goal rather than a short-term one. It's funny because like I think it's I don't remember when I started thinking of it this way, but in at the end of the day, like what we're all kind of doing and building here is we are trying to build a sport. And I don't think anyone in the world has a formula that's like, okay, this is how you build a sport. Like it's just something that occurs over time naturally, that just kind of keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps getting attention and keeps adding new things to it. But there's no like real formula to it. There's no like, you know, there's no like path. Like even if you look at the way like football and basketball in the States, both of those sports almost died at various points, you know, like both of them were split, much like we are now with like an ESL and a Blast. You had like the AFL and the NFL that had to combine, the ABA and the NBA, and they all came back to it. I even, you know, when I started at some point, like 3 years into casting, I actually even went and bought a fucking textbook, like a college textbook of like some like sports business economy that was kind of exploring like how sports actually started making enough money to actually survive. And here's the great, I mean, not even really a secret, but it doesn't really get talked about all that much, is like the NFL was really struggling until they kind of figured out how to sell broadcasting rights. You know, like they really weren't like doing anything great until they realized that they could sell broadcasting rights to like CBS and NBC and ESPN for like tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And that influx of cash is what gave them kind of like the money to be able to grow and develop and get more eyes on the sport. And I know this is a conversation that's kind of quietly been happening at times with certain people behind the scenes, but you know, for esports, we don't have that cash in with broadcasting rights. It's not the way the industry works, and I think it's kind of funny because I even this the reason this is on my brain is because it actually popped into my head. I saw an interview, oddly enough, with Matt Damon last week, talking about like some of the new problems in Hollywood that they're having in terms of like building new blockbusters and getting funds to experiment and try movies. And he talks about, he mentioned a lot of the same things that we've kind of touched on in this, but one of the big things he said is he was like, you guys have to realize like Hollywood and movies and studios and production studios used to have this whole extra revenue stream of hundreds of millions of dollars in DVD sales and Blu-ray sales that they no longer get because everything is now streaming. So it is basically like this industry just had like, you know, I don't know what the figure is, but just to throw one out there, like 20% of like the income or the profit that they would have normally had on a movie 10 years ago has now just kind of evaporated and disappeared. And it's the same thing kind of with esports and, you know, building this, you don't like YouTube and Twitch. These guys aren't going to get into some bidding war for Counter-Strike content. They've got a million streamers posting, you know, they've got plenty of content. They don't need to get into a bidding war. So I think a lot of esports is going to be solving that solution of finding where you're going to make up for that lack of revenue when it comes to those broadcasting, right?
Yeah, you even saw it tried a little bit with Overwatch, right? It was like they went from Twitch to YouTube, and that hasn't gone very well. So
we do have a formula on how to not make a sport.
Yeah, there you go.
It is Overwatch.
We did Facebook at one point. You know, remember those days?
Facebook gaming,
on Facebook. Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah, and everybody was so
time.
up in arms about the fact that they had to go to a different website. Now, admittedly, I don't know if it was very good viewer experience.
I wanted to absolutely cry during those seasons of Pro League. I remember being with. That was also that was coincided with when ESL started doing hard start times for matches so that fans could always tune in. You know, it used to be like if a game was a quick 2-0, then this game was slated to start at 3, but because we're already done with that game, it's actually going to start at 2, and fans would get upset because they're missing their team playing. So that was also the first season, I think, where they instituted the hard start times. So I remember Stunna was the host and I was the only analyst, and we would be doing the show out of LA. And then we'd go back to the green room and we'd like look at the Facebook stream and it'd be like 12 people. Like it would be 12 people tuning in on Facebook for North American Pro League. And then we'd look over at the clock and we'd be waiting because like NA at the time like was really segregated with like really good teams and really shit teams. So there'd be a lot of blowouts. So we'd just be sat there between games for like an hour and a half, just having to sit in the green room doing nothing for 12 viewers. And it was like, please, there's 12 people tuning in. Can we accelerate this process? Can we just start the next game so that we can get out of here before 11 p.m.? Just something like have mercy, please, for the love of God. That was a tough season to get through.
Yeah. Well, I suppose now people maybe complain or whatever, the armchair analysts and all that about where the state of it's at, but at least you can get your free content easily and on a good platform, right? So
there you go.
Yeah, I definitely struggled back in those days to sometimes find where the stream was at, you know. It was a very weird time. But look, fellas, that's going to do us. We're hitting a decent mark. We got an hour and 30 out of it, which is what we like to hit. And yeah, a great conversation overall, right? Nice and general, all about the broadcast and where it's at and where it could possibly go. Thanks again, Moses, for coming on. And Pronogo, of course, thank you for joining me as you do week in, week out. We will indeed, ladies and gentlemen, catch you in the next episode.
You're going to love this video right here. You're going to love it. Check it out right now.